Hey everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight to celebrate Galentine's Day with us, and for supporting your local independent bookstore, as well as these excellent authors. Tonight we'll hear from the four lovely authors behind me about writing women, and all things female friendship. They'll also read from their recent works. Julia Ridley Smith. Sex Romp Gone Wrong is Julia Ridley Smith's first story collection. Her first book, The Sum of Trifles, is a memoir published by the University of Georgia. Julia teaches creative writing at UNC Chapel Hill. Karen Tucker is the author of the novel Bewilderness. Born and raised in North Carolina, she teaches fiction and creative nonfiction at UNC Chapel Hill. Leslie Pietryk's collection of linked stories set in DC, Admit This to No One, was published in 2021 by Unnamed Press. She'll read tonight from her novel, Silver Girl. Alison B. Hart is the author of The Work Wife and the forthcoming novel, April, May, June, July. She grew up in Los Angeles and now lives in North Carolina. All right, thank you. And you can grab any of those books after the talk up front, and we can do a little extra signing then as well, if anyone didn't get their book signed. Karen, Julia, Leslie, Allison. So sign the bios that way.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Everybody hear me? I'm gonna do.
I'm not going to do a fake voice. That's ridiculous. Thank you all for coming. Daniel would have liked that, I think. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Happy Galentine's Day to all who celebrate. Yeah. So I'm Julia, and I wanted to do a Galentine's Day event because female friendship is so crucial in my writing life as well as in my everyday life. And it's central to some of the stories in my new collection, and it's a theme in the work of all of these wonderful writers here. So I think we're going to have plenty to talk about. Before we get into that, I'd like to say thank you to Alex and to Flyleaf for hosting us, and thank you to Flyleaf and also to my publisher Blair for refreshments. So if you have not refreshed yourself, I hope that you will partake of the goodies that are over there. Okay, so I think what we're gonna do is I have a question for each of these writers. We have a little bit to read to you, but I'm hoping that the conversation will just sort of open up and start to feel organic, you know, a little bit like maybe the first hour of a slumber party before it starts to go off the rails and we scratch each other's eyes out and, you know, have weird dancing and stuff like that. In case you were wondering what happens at girls' slumber parties, if you've never been to one, that's just the tip of the iceberg pretty much, right? So, you know, we're going to be talking about not only the sort of the loving parts of female friendship, but the parts of it that can be difficult as well. And that I think that has intrigued me in all of your work, the difficulty of what female friendship can mean, what trying to be in relationship with other women when we have mixed feelings, as we all do as humans. So, Leslie, I'm going to start with you. Your novel. What?
Okay. Pay attention.
Pay attention. So you guys can blank out a little bit, but not too much. Not too much, because you never know. Your novel, Silver Girl, which I really enjoyed, is very focused on the friendship of two girls who were in college in Chicago during the Tylenol murders in the early 1980s. Raise your hand if you remember the Tylenol, right? So for those of you too young to remember the Tylenol, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Tylenol murders, and then I'll get to my question?
Oh, okay. Just really briefly, during the 1980s in Chicago, somebody stuffed cyanide into capsules of Tylenol and returned them to the drugstore shelf. 7 people died, And the good thing is that the bad thing is that like 3 or 4 people in one family died, which is bad, but that led to a quick understanding of what had happened, that it was Tylenol. That was good. So everybody in Chicago threw away all their Tylenol, drugstores cleared the shelves. That was good because nobody else died, but that was also bad because that erased all evidence of the crime scene. And so nobody has ever been convicted of this crime. And so that's why, now you can't even open a bottle of Tylenol without going through 18 million steps. And that's why medication is no longer in pull-apart capsules.
That's also why I always say to my husband, did you hear the pop? Did it crack? Like any kind of opening that happens in our house, right? Okay, thank you for that context, because I know we have some folks here too young to remember that whole thing. So these girls in your novel, they're really close. They're really close friends, but they're not entirely honest with each other, kind of from the get-go. And that's one of the things that really intrigued me about them. Plus, there's a class difference between them. And I found that this combination of mendacity and kind of, not having the same amount of money, not having the same class background really creates this compelling tension throughout the novel. So that I was always kind of like waiting to see what was going to happen next, because there are so many possible ways in which this friendship could go off the rails. Can you talk about how you developed that friendship on the page a little bit, and what surprised you about these characters as you were writing?
Okay, so this is 2 girls at a fancy college by the lake that may or may not be Northwestern University, where I went to school, but it may not be that. And the narrator, it's first person narrator. She's unreliable, as Julia said, and she's unnamed. We never know what her name is. And she has come from Iowa, a more working class background, to this very fancy school, and immediately meets Jess, who is from the Chicago area, from this affluent family, and they form this kind of intoxicating but highly insular friendship that is everything you want in a friend, and also like incredibly damaging for everybody. And there's a real power dynamic between the 2 that is explored through the book, as the narrator kind of is jealous of Jess, wants to keep up with her, and is terrified of losing her, and yet makes a series of very bad decisions that end up, complicating the friendship. And I guess I had a complicated friendship in college that ended in a painful, sad way that was kind of haunting for many years. And so I think that's where this book came from, wanting to try and understand that and think about, things happen and unfold when you're 20, and then you're older and you're like, what really was going on back then? So this book is not exactly what happened. Please know that. But it definitely was inspired by what happened to me, and thinking about the depths of a very complicated female friendship.
What do you think made you start thinking about that later on as something you wanted to revisit in fiction?
Oh, well, because it was so painful, obviously I want to write about it and expose it for everybody, right?
Right, so that you could just make the pain linger on.
Right, so I could make a little joke at a reading and everyone could chuckle nervously, like, isn't that what we do?
Yeah, but also all of us think about that friend that we also had that weird thing with, who,
right.
Why did that friendship deteriorate?
Well, and it also honestly was like looking back at myself as a totally different person. I think that's some of the way that this narrator is so dissociated, because I, in this distance of time and perspective, am able now to look back at who that person was and see those mistakes that person, me, made, and to see sort of the seeds of, I guess I'll just say seeds of destruction in the friendship that were there all along from the beginning that I would not have known at the time. It was painful, but it was really empowering to write this book and revisit that time.
Thank you. I think Seeds of Destruction might be a good segue into a little bit. Is that fair? There's also a pill connection but pills feature in a very different way in your novel, The Wilderness, which follows young friends Irene and Luce as they grapple with opioid addiction. And one of the things that I really admired about your novel and your writing is how you manage to let the devastation of what happens between them actually happen. One, because I find it hard to, as a writer, to let really hard things happen to my characters. It's hard to be in that space, and you become so attached to your characters, and you know something horrible has to happen to them, and you don't want to let it happen, but you have to. But even as that's going on, there just remains this real tenderness between those young women, and that was so moving to me. And that tenderness remains even as they're doing things where you would begin to think, like, how is it even possible for that to stay there? Could you talk about kind of building that relationship on the page? Because in each of these novels, I feel like those friendships are so vibrant and vivid. It's almost like, the reader becomes the third wheel in that friendship, but also able to kind of situate yourself in each of the characters.
I don't know. I wrote this novel when I was in grad school as a non-traditional student. I was older by my colleagues 15 to 20 years, and consequently felt lonely at times. I think that's why it was easy for me to spend time with these two girls and make it a tender relationship and get to know them intimately and know it's not easy to have bad things happen. Even you talking about it, I'm feeling emotional. Yeah. I wrote this book, I started writing it in 2018. It came out in 2021. I haven't really even looked at it in a couple of years. It came out during COVID. I haven't even really done any readings except over Zoom a few times. And I don't know, I'm into a new book now, and yet you're bringing it up, it's still very alive, which is cool, I guess. Yeah. I think literature is alive, or at least, I don't know, for me at least. This book remains alive. How do you do it? I don't know. One thing I tell my students, and I try to remind myself, is why are you writing? Remember that it's more important than how you're doing it. So if there are any writers in here, we always worry about how well we're doing or how poorly we're doing. Try to think, why are you doing it? Why was I doing it? Well, I was lonely, but I was always writing about opioid addiction. And I have a hard time believing that anyone in the room hasn't been affected in some way by that.
Absolutely.
That's why.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that reminder of the why. Because I can get really hung up on the how.
Me too.
I guess we all do.
Yeah, I just wrote it down.
Yeah. Do you want to read a little bit, or do you want me to give you a minute?
No, I'll be dramatic whenever I read.
Okay. Can I tell you? Before you start, I had my book launch at Scuppernong the other week, and it went really well. And later that night at 3 a.m., I woke up saying to myself, "You were too dramatic. You shouldn't have been so dramatic."
So Julia and I had the same acting teacher in
Speaking
high
of
school
dramatic.
years ago. Julia is, was a freshman when we were seniors. I'm talking to one of my high school friends who's here tonight. Was starred in The Glass Menagerie.
It's true.
So yes, there is a streak of the theater actor among us.
Wow.
Certainly not me. This will be quick. It's less than 2 pages if I can see it. Outside, the sun had turned an overripe. Oh, just to set up quickly. This is the girls have been sober and clean for almost a year, and then the narrator discovers that her best friend has slipped twice in a week and is no longer sober. Outside, the sun had turned an overripe sort of color, like a peach right before it goes wormy. From my spot on the couch, I watched it sink lower and lower until it vanished behind the mountain. I reached up and pulled the chain on the gooseneck lamp next to the coffee table. A cone of light formed in the air. Only then did I realize Luce had her eyes open. She was watching me with a funny expression, as if there was something she wanted to tell me. "What?" I said. She filled her lungs, let the air out slowly. "Look, people drift apart. It happens." Drift. I did my best to smile at her. "Sorry, but you're too messed up to make any sense. Go back to sleep. We have a big day tomorrow." "I'm serious," she said. "You're this close to getting your 1-year tag, and I'm about to take my second day 1 in a week. Let's be real. We're in completely different places." I told her how much time a person has doesn't matter. "Bullshit," she said. This next part, Greenie doesn't like so much when I share it. The regulars don't appear to be all that wild about it either, and even the hot-off-the-press newbies tend to start squirming around in their chairs. But what they don't realize is it's one of the best, most wholesome parts of the story. I mean, don't get me wrong, Greenie's always helped me a lot, and I respect her, just like I respect anyone else who has the guts to sit circled up in these rooms. I mean, old-timers like her know something about life on this planet that most of us never come close to understanding. So you'd think she'd recognize that what happened next has nothing to do with loss or pain or failure. It's from an entirely different universe. I reached for the mail on the coffee table. Got one of those postcards that are always advertising $10 oil changes. Took Luce's stash out of my pocket, shook out a bag on the table, chopped it, sniffed up a rail. A warm fizz filled my veins, and it wasn't long before my knee felt better than ever. The rest of my troubles faded into the dim, one by one. Soon the only thing left was the mysterious grace of God rippling all through me, along with a faint sour drip at the back of my throat. And Luce, glowing in the yellow haze of lamplight, her glorious dog tooth incisor, her lungs taking air in and out. Already I could see us walking into tomorrow's meeting, chins high, shoulder to shoulder. We'd pour ourselves cups of coffee and join the circle, listen to stories, maybe share a little, reach in the box of key tags and take our day ones. Just the thought of it brought on a whole new rush of wonder, and to celebrate, I'd cut another line of powder. Luce and I were together again.
Thank you. That's stunning. If nobody's told you lately. No, it really is. And that moment of watching the friend give up everything that she's achieved to be in solidarity with her friend, it's incredible. And also feels so real to me, that kind of how far will you go to sacrifice for your friend that you love? I think that it's amazing, and you capture it so beautifully in that passage. So you talked about the why of why you were writing this story, and brought up that all of us surely have lives that have been touched in some way by opioid addiction. Similarly, many of us lives also touched by the kinds of stories brought up during the Me Too movement, which Alison takes on in her novel, The Work Wife. Yours is a story that, building it around something that's also topical. And I think what's so amazing about both of these books is that, when we hear that something a novel is about something topical, we start to worry it's going to be so issuesy, right? And that the character development is going to play second fiddle to putting a spotlight on the issue that's in the middle of the book. And both of these novels don't do, you're too gifted for that, both of you. So in your novel, you got which is a Hollywood novel. So right off the bat, you're like, these folks are doing jobs that I have no clue what these jobs are, right? And so I'm learning as I'm reading. It involves three main characters: Holly, who's married to a very, very rich and successful Hollywood director, Zan, who is one of his personal assistants, and Phoebe, who is his ex-wife. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this novel is that it's about women who are trying to work, right? I love stories about women trying to do their work, and this novel is often about how sexism is just interfering with women just trying to do their jobs, right? Could you talk a little bit about that and how you came to know this world so well that you're able to depict it in such granular detail?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I can't write any characters unless I know where their money is coming from. Mm-hmm. And usually that's what the work is that they're doing. And sometimes it's quite elaborate, like, well, they had this job first, but then that didn't work out. And they tried that. It's just like, I can't get into their head if I don't know, like, what they're afraid of or how they're surviving or, how they see themselves that way. So that's always really important to me. And then in the case of this book, I had worked as a personal assistant for a long time and didn't actually plan to write about that ever because I had signed many NDAs. Cannot and legally not allowed to write about that ever. And I just obviously wasn't doing it in Hollywood. I had my own separate Hollywood obsession. So it was like putting that together with the fact that I had worked.
So you weren't a personal assistant to a Hollywood person, it was somebody else.
Okay. Yeah. Totally different world. And, again, like Leslie, I should say this is fiction, just to reassure.
Of course, now we're all like,
yeah. Nobody would know. But they had an obscene amount of wealth, and so that weirdly was a job that I did for a really long time. And so, it's sort of like as you say, it's like your why is very important. Why are you there? What are you doing it for? Many of us had other passions outside of being a personal assistant. And then maybe you also have some unexamined daddy issues or something, but it's just good to know or student loans, all of these, usually it's a little bit of everything, so knowing the why was important. And
it just seems like I have this joke about women having the curse of competence. It's like the more competent you are, the more stuff's going to get piled on you to do.
Amen.
And that personal assistant job just sounds like it's the peak, curse of competence job.
Yeah. Yeah, because, the work that you're doing is always a little bit faintly ridiculous. So it's just like, how well can you do it? And so if you're doing well at it, it means that you are learning the habits and traits and very minute preferences of the people that you're working for.
It's almost like you're a human AI for somebody else who's can't do their life.
Yes. Yeah, can't or don't want to.
Or don't want, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to read a little bit?
Sure.
Do we need a better segue into your reading?
No, it's fine. So the section I'm going to read is it's from Holly's point of view. So she's Ted is this movie mogul, director, billionaire guy, and she's his wife. And They have this very large personal staff, and so that necessitates them having his and hers chiefs of staff. Yes. And so this is a little scene between Holly and her chief of staff, who's named Aaron. "Holly, we need to leave in 5 minutes," Aaron said. "Oh," Holly said, hand to her breastbone. She hadn't heard Aaron come in. "How long have you been standing there?" "Only a minute or two. I'll knock louder next time." Ted had asked 15 years ago if she was sure about Aaron, the first assistant they'd hired to be hers, not theirs. From now on, they would have his and hers chiefs of staff. Holly liked that hers would be close to her age, that she didn't fit the mold of the assistants Ted usually chose. Aaron wasn't strident or intellectually superior. She was a wraith, a poet with a degree in library science and not the least bit ambitious. Holly had even thought, briefly, that they would be friends, although that was before she understood about money, that you could never fully discount the effect of it on your relationships, no matter how much of it you gave away or to whom. Aaron worked for Holly, not the other way around, so confidences would only ever flow in one direction. No matter how much Holly had tried over the years to pump Aaron for information about men, her friends, her sisters, other poets, or how many secrets Holly had shared about the bass player she dated in college, the funny things Ted muttered in his sleep, "Land ho," he yelped once and then hugged his pillow, which actors at the Golden Globes were sloppy drunk before the show even began, and who iced out who during the commercial breaks. Erin never fully let her guard down with Holly. On the other hand, she never tried to make things all about herself either. She was at the estate every morning by 8 a.m. and often stayed until 8 or 9 at night, even when she was pregnant. Still, there were moments when Erin's ability to disappear into the background was a little bit creepy. "We need to tie a bell around your neck," Holly said. And then she laughed and hugged her to show her there were no hard feelings.
Thank you. Yeah, you really get a sense in the book of how weird it must be to have just people hovering behind you all the time. And, you know, Holly, so I felt for her and her desire to sort of want to be friends, but she can never quite be friends with any of these people because they're all paid to be her friends. So there's nothing natural in any relation that's going on.
There's no like real intimacy. Like the intimacy she would like to have with her husband is crowded out by how many people are always like on all of their emails between each other as in the CC section. And then even, with the people that they're working for, the motives are so confused all the time. So she's very lonely.
Yeah. And money comes into play in your book in a really important way too, between the friends. Yeah. So I was wondering, I don't know if your passage that you wanted to read kind of connects up with the theme of money. And
Sure. No, it doesn't, but I'll pretend it does.
We'll pretend.
Yeah. Money.
Money.
Okay, so Jess is sort of auditioning some new friends in this kind of power move, and they're all at brunch. And there's two girls and the narrator and Jess. And I don't know the sorority system here at UNC, but at this school, Theta is like the top sorority that will be mentioned. So one of the girls said, she looked at me, tilting her head as if I were a confusing piece of sculpture. "You know Jess how?" "We met our first day," Jess said. "We're going to be roommates next year. After that, we'll share a cute little apartment off campus, then be maid of honor in each other's weddings, and finally live happily ever after, a block apart in Chicago till we're little old ladies." "So then you're best friends?" the other girl asked. Coiled around her neck was a fuchsia and orange jacquard scarf that maybe would have looked good on a French woman or a Theta. If I had to guess, she was a theater major. "Yes," I said exactly as Jess said. "I don't believe in best friends." There was an awkward silence. I smeared a glob of butter onto my roll, rubbed my knife across its slickness over and over, creating a perfectly smooth surface. At home, we sprinkled salt on buttered bread, but I had forced myself out of the habit here. said the girl with the scarf. Me neither, the other girl said. Ranking people as juvenile and demeaning. That's not why, Jess said, and the girl turned deeply silent as if slapped on the hand for grabbing candy. I had said yes because I thought I was supposed to, but now I concentrated on running my fork tines along the rim of my plate, unwilling to get caught with food cramming my mouth at the wrong time. No one asked, "What do you mean then, Jess?" Though I felt we all wanted to. They were sliding me sideways glances. Jess had told me they wanted to meet me, but I bet she had told them the exact same thing, that I had wanted to meet them. I would have expected that I would be the one screwing up. I would be the one saying, "I don't believe in best friends." Maybe Jess wasn't screwing up. Maybe this is what she wanted me to know. Jess said, "Best friend sounds so possessive, so reductive." The red-haired girls looked at each other. Suddenly they looked like they had known each other for 100 years, like they could tell what the other was thinking. "I hate being boxed in," Jess said. "Best friend, one person holding all my secrets like I'm a possession. Thinking about a best friend creates unhealthy competition, like us right now." She kept talking and defending herself, but I stopped listening. What it was sounding like was that she didn't want these girls thinking I was already her best friend. I'll stop there.
Yeah, this idea of power in friendships is something that comes through all of your novel, and I get into it too a little bit in some of the stories in this book. Where does that come from, do you think, this sort of like power play between girls?
Are you going to answer any questions, Julia?
I don't know.
Do you answer that question?
Well,
Where do you
answer-
think that comes
Where
from?
do I think it comes from? I mean, I don't know if I know where it comes from other than just people, people are like that, but I mean, I think there's that, like, there's the competition for attention from other people, whether it's male attention or attention from other girls, or this idea of like ranking. I'm glad you read that passage, because there's that whole idea. Are you my best friend? Are you, or do I have multiple best friends? And then what does that mean? And what rank is it? And I think the younger you are, the more important that feels. And by the time you're my age, I'm just glad I have friends who are still talking to me and are like healthy enough to go out of their house and stuff like that. So I guess I'll read a little passage to get that out of the, get that over with, and then maybe you can ask me a question if you want to, or we can move on to some other topics. Are we good on time? Somebody being the timekeeper?
No, it's 20 of,
Okay.
roughly 20.
Good. All right. So I'm going to read just a passage from a story called Flown, which is about a woman whose daughter becomes friends with the son of a woman who was once her really close friend. But the two older women are now estranged. And so throughout the story, she's sort of remembering what their friendship was like in college. And her name is Wendy, and her friend was Fiona. Sophomore year, UNC Greensboro, 1991. Wendy's smoking out front of McKeever after Renaissance poetry when this lanky girl with dyed black hair borrows her lighter. As cleaner cut students cross the sun-dappled campus paths, the girl tells Wendy the filthiest joke she's ever heard another girl tell. Delighted, Wendy asks her name. Fiona, delighted again. The following afternoon, there she is in Intro to Theater, the dirty joke girl. Wendy liked acting, Fiona the black-clothed tech jobs. Important things occurred out in the world, the aftermath of the Gulf War, Waco, the Rodney King trial. But what was all that next to the taming of the shrew or the little foxes? Semester after semester, each play was a self-contained world they inhabited intensely for a time, then left behind forever. They became Wendy and Fiona, a package deal wherever they went. Back then, she'd have told you their kids would grow up as close as siblings. Instead, Megan and Harris are slowly getting acquainted Saturday after Saturday over the noise of their video games. Megan made Wendy promise not to spy on them when Harris came over, and Wendy's husband, Chris, demanded just as adamantly that she keep an eye on the kids. What on earth could they do with the door open and me wandering around the house? You never know, Chris scowled. Megan's a good girl. She makes straight A's. So did you. True. Wendy made Dean's List the same semester she rode high and shirtless down Battleground Avenue in Fiona's crappy car, scarfing hot Krispy Kreme donuts and screaming the words to Welcome to the Jungle, ironically, of course, as the wind whipped and mingled their long hair. Battleground Avenue, you know it, baby. That hot donut sign goes on, you better roll up. It's still there. Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, in writing that scene, obviously I was really wanting to capture that moment of when you sort of like, you fall in love with your girlfriend, right? And you just feel so invincible together. And I think that's one of the things I appreciated across these books is where, you know, women are helping each other. So yes, we've focused on some of the rougher things. But in my daily life and definitely in my writing life, my friendship with other women is so important because they, you know, I mean, pragmatically, we just help each other, like actually get things done. But I also have these writing friends that I really rely on. Some of them for like accountability, some of them for, you know, actual, you know, like check-ins on the phone, like, I suck, no you don't, it's all good, you can do this. Do you each have somebody that you, like a writing friend that you're kind of in constant contact with in some way?
I do. I have some I moved to North Carolina about 2.5 years ago from the Washington, D.C. area where I lived for a really long time, which I would say has a really lovely writing community because kind of nobody cares about creative writers because it's all politics. So you can just sort of fly under the radar and be very supportive in this way. And certainly I have known and do know male writers who are very supportive, but I was very active in kind of the female writing community in Washington. People would organize dinners, sort of open dinner, potluck dinners. Oh, come to this dinner, meet, you know, what you need, what can we do? And then I have a set of very close friends that we still, you know, communicate on Zoom. And I think what's interesting about these friends is, yes, we've sort of talked about these complicated relationships, and I'm sure there's complications to my friendships with these female writers, but I would say that we do not feel jealous. We don't have power games. If we do, I'm too dumb to notice them, and they're lording it over me or something, and I don't even know. But it, you know, fiction, you want conflict and difficulty. In real life, you want true blue, beautiful friends, and it is possible to find those people.
How about you, Karen?
I do have a wonderful writing group that I've maintained since my lonely days at grad school. So yeah, I cry about that, but also I met incredible people that I still talk to, and they live all over the country now, and we've been in the same group, you know, for 6 years, I guess. And we trade manuscripts, and we're all writing, teaching, editing, and it's incredible.
I love that.
Yeah, I have two best friends, one of those people. But one of them I met in grad school when we were getting our MFA together. And so it's really helpful having a friend who's going through so much of the same thing. And I guess what I would say is we are absolutely like each other's biggest cheerleaders, but I do think we have to talk about it, just the weirdness of the fact that we're both going through these things and sometimes having different outcomes. Like she was published much earlier than I was, and you know, I have had plenty of like rejection in my experience and stuff, but you just get presented with different opportunities, and so it's not just automatic that we wouldn't have like hurt feelings, not because we're hurting each other's feelings, but just because it's tricky when you're both going through something and you want the same thing, and you're so happy when it happens for them, and you don't want to take their chance away from them, but when it's your chance, you want it to go as swimmingly as it has, and vice versa, so it's been really wonderful having a friend that we can have like those conversations with.
Great. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So for those of you who are writing both novels and short stories, when is there sort of a decision process that something wants to be a novel and not a short story?
Well, I write both novels and short stories, and I would say that for me, a short story could start with, something that I thought of on the drive over here, or some comment that I overhear somebody making when they're pouring wine. Like, I would just start a short story off some tiny thing and see what happens. And for me, a novel has to have a big question in my mind, usually a question that I don't know how to answer, that I may never really answer, but that I need to explore. And that I would never just kind of start a novel on a lark. At least for me, I do a lot of prompt writing, and so I write about the setting, I write about the characters, I think about things that are going to happen. I sort of spend a lot of time seeing the big story that is going to happen in a way that a short story is like, well, let's just see what happens. And it doesn't mean that short stories can't be about big things, but that at least for me, the beginning is just so very different. And it's possible, so when I was writing prompts for this, thinking about these girls, thinking about my own life, it just was a cascade of more questions. Well, how did they meet? Well, why don't they get along? Well, what did she do to betray her? So the more the questions expand, the more I see it's a novel, not short stories.
Anybody else?
I think there's a little bit of like figuring out what your form is. I mean, I started by writing stories, and in workshops, people are always like, "This wants to be a novel," and I just wanted to deck them. You don't understand what I'm doing.
They were not your friends.
They weren't. But I was doing a lot of like linked stories. That was what I was, and then eventually, at some point it clicked, and I was like, oh, well, because this actually, I conceived of these characters as a linked story collection first. And then years later, I was like, oh, wait, I know how I could do it as a novel. And then doing it as a novel, I was like, oh, okay, this is my form. This is how I think. And so it just took a little, for me, time to like stop banging my head against the story option and realize that I just had more that I wanted to do. Length was better for me.
Sometimes it's kind of harder to do novels in a grad program.
Yeah.
And so I feel that people who don't necessarily want to write short stories kind of end up being pushed into writing them because of the circumstances.
Yeah, it's what you can achieve in a semester.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if we feel, well, I don't think we all have to answer the question. Do we have to all have to
You answer.
Me?
You're working on a novel now.
Don't tell. I mean, I think for me, often short stories are more, like there's some situation that comes up or like a little incident. And so I know that the story kind of gels around that incident. And then I don't imagine that there's going to be more to it than that. There's like, one moment that I sort of want to highlight. In that story, Flown, for instance, there's a moment where these two women have to confront each other. And I must have, when I said it's hard to let your characters do the hard things, I tried to avoid for so long the two of them actually having this awkward conversation which is like that. I think that's my Southern upbringing. It's like, oh, the worst thing I can imagine putting in a story is an awkward conversation between two women that didn't like act nice to each other. Oh no. You know, but like that's what that whole story is driving towards, that moment of them confronting each other about what had happened between them years before. With the novel, I think, yeah, it's like there's a bigger question. There's like a bigger span of time I want to follow. And I want to see what kind of like bigger change might be possible for these people that I'm writing about. And there's also like more characters that I'm trying to, I don't know, for me in my short story.
One story where it starts out in the mom's point of view and then it flips into the daughter's point of view, which I feel like doesn't happen a lot in short stories.
Yeah, and I totally tell my students, don't write for multiple points of view. That's unless you can do something really different. I think if you make that choice, each point of view has to bring something that the other one can't bring for the story. Great, thank you. Other questions? Mindful.
I just have a quick one for Leslie, please. Would you talk a bit more about prompt writing?
Oh, I would love to, because for a long time I felt very superior, like I don't need to do prompts, I'm a writer, whatever. And then I had like a dark night of the soul patch in my writing life, and I was like, I got to do something to remind myself that writing is fun. So I started a prompt group in my neighborhood in Alexandria, Virginia, and we're still meeting, so like 12 years later. And we get together, and I realize what I don't like about some prompts, just me personally, is when they're too directive. Like, write about the best birthday you had. Like, no, I don't want to. Like, it just makes me not want to.
Right. Yeah.
But if the prompt word is birthday and it's so open-ended, it's like, oh, I can do that. So I set up this group exactly the way I want, and what we do is, see, that's what happens when you set things up. We chit-chat or whatever, and then we get a one-word prompt like birthday. We write for 15 minutes, then we get a second word, basement, and you can start over, but with the new word, but mostly we've gotten really skilled at just going on. And the idea is that you have a little bit of guidance and a few rules, but really no rules. Nobody cares if you keep writing, but when you see everybody else writing, you're like, I better find something to say about a birthday. And what I find too about prompts that I didn't realize is that you can gear everything towards the project you're working on. So I could point out like at least probably 10 different sections of Silver Girl where I could say, oh, the prompt word was adventure here. The prompt was a silver sparkly headband. Prompt was the word blue. But you would never know that as a reader.
It's like an interesting constraint.
Yeah. I recommend it, and I guess what I recommend is not ever being like I was, so snobby and feeling superior to learning and trying new things, and that if there's something that isn't working for you, try and find a way that will make it work for your practice. So I would be kind of lost at this point without prompts. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that I write by hand to prompts, and that feels really different to me. I sort of slow down a little bit, and also it's easier, let's not go back and correct that sentence, just move forward. But if you want to do prompts on a computer, go ahead. If you have a fancy fountain pen, do it. Whatever works for you is what works.
Cool, thanks.
Do you guys do any prompt writing?
My advisor in grad school used to give us prompts, and her thing, this was Abigail Thomas. I don't know if any of you have read her, but she's this wonderful memoirist, is her thing, but she wrote fiction as well. And she would give us 2 pages, and often she would give us 3 words, like 2 pages that contain a bus stop, a banjo, and a crying jack or something, or 2 pages of, when you couldn't fit it all in or something. And the 2 pages is really helpful, just like that's such an arbitrary amount. You can keep going, but it was like we always were doing our best work in those 2 pages, much better than these like polished stories that we slaved over. She could, that we really worked too hard on. She could feel the like energy. We could all hear the energy in everybody's 2 pages.
Well, it's like such low stakes. Like all I have to do is write 2 pages. All I have to do is write for 15 minutes. Nobody cares. And that, I think, sort of opens up your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I don't really do, I think, prompts so much, but it's that small assignments idea, always the in Lamont thing, shitty first drafts and small assignments, right? And so when I'm working best is when I give myself like, all you have to do today is work on, what is like one thing that she's going to say to that other woman, start with that, and usually it's whatever gets you started, and then once you're going. I don't know, for me, do you use prompts?
I do think more what you're doing. Like my one goal for today is X.
Right.
And if I do it, okay.
Yeah, if I get there, great. And usually it's more than that. Although sometimes I've done some prompts for myself when I was feeling stuck. Okay, my favorite one that I had made for myself was I decided, I must have been insane this day. I decided that I was going to use every line from the Prince song "Darling Nikki" because I can remember all the words from singing it in my friend's driveway, where we had to listen to it where her parents couldn't hear it because that's a dirty song. That I would just take each line and use that line as a prompt to write something.
Wow.
And
Cool.
yeah,
In one sitting or several sittings?
it was just in one sitting. It's actually not that super, so like some of the times the line would be, I'd write just a couple of lines, and other times it would give me like a whole paragraph. And most of what I got from that was not, it's nothing usable, but there was like one section where there's an idea for, I don't know whether it's going to be a story or actually something that appears in my novel.
It's a magazine, right?
I'm not telling. But the point is, and I often say to my students when I give them prompts, is like, it's not that everything you write down in response to this prompt is going to be like, oh, now I have a story, or it's not that it's all usable, but even if it gives you one image, one little piece of dialogue, then you got some gold from that day.
Or discover something about the character.
Absolutely.
Julie, I just have to say, when I was reading Flown, I kept thinking, Wendy and Lisa. No, it's Wendy and Fiona.
I know, I had the same problem, of course.
My question, and that leads me to wonder, like, how much do you think about somebody's opinion when you're writing, like your friend who you like, does that impact the way you would write because you're thinking, is she going to read this someday? Or like your boss, would you like think, I don't want him to think that I was ever thinking this or doing this? Or like your friend, does that like affect how you write? Or do you take things out?
I mean, it definitely affects you, but you're usually coming up with games to like not let it affect you.
Like to force yourself to put something in?
Yeah, why shouldn't I write the book I want to write just because I had a boss who has a feeling about it?
Right.
I mean, I've truly worried about his feelings for so long. Why am I going to worry about it? But I have to like have that fight with myself, I mean, that same teacher of mine, Abby, would say, like, if you're writing for revenge, forget it. Like, you have to be writing for yourself. So I ask myself that question. As long as I'm not like writing for revenge, then what do I care? I mean, and then you worry about it with your family and all this stuff, but yeah, I feel like that's what I do. Is I'm always spending the time to like make myself not worry about it. Like I have to just know at the end of the day, like I'm a good person. I'm not sitting here trying to like rip anybody's heart out. I'm just doing the thing that like I'm called to do, and that's it.
Yeah, and by the time you've actually produced something that might be publishable, you're like, I can't care about these people's feelings. I mean, a little bit, but also I think you do things to make it, you give that person some other characteristics or something, like, right? So you're writing about Hollywood people, not
That's
whatever
right.
world that guy was from, right? So that's some of it. You also do what I did. I wait till some people die, and then you write about it, right? So that's a kind of a classic. And then of course people have often said that people don't recognize themselves. So you might write what you consider to be a true portrait of someone, and then they don't realize that that's them, right? There's also you have to be relying on the idea they're actually going to read something. Are they readers? I don't know.
I think sort of three things, and one is there are some people who I would worry about, and so maybe I choose not to write about them, or maybe I will when
Not
they
my
don't.
daughter, for example. Right. I'm not going to be blasé about my
And then two, I write fiction for a reason, so you can always say, look, I made it up, it's fiction, and nobody believes this. And then the third thing is actually harder, and that is, I think that I try to always be hardest on the character who people would perceive as me versus my friend. And so it's like, look, if I can be this hard and take it for myself, then you can surely deal with, a little bit of hurt feelings if the me character is doing these really awful things.
I write for revenge.
Well played.
Still stand on that.
Revenge drama.
Yeah, I don't know. I see their point. I totally, and I'm partly being facetious, but also I have a lot of anger, and there's a lot of injustice in the world, and I'm mad about it, and things that I'm working on, especially right now. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I don't know what to say. It's not real people, but I guess it's more revenge on systems. Maybe that's the difference.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, all that anger has to go somewhere. We have it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's justified. Do we have? Okay, we're like maybe one last small little question, and then we can have cookies and drinks and sign more books if you want. Anybody else?
There may be a bigger question, but you can make it as short as you want to be. But I was wondering just about talking about all these books about female friendship, if there are ones that were for you a good touchstone when you were writing these books, or something that surprised you that you were inspired by writing.
Anybody?
You mean other books of female friendship?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that inspired you at all, or if that was not, or you were writing it out of the void of it, right? Like you were writing the book that you wanted to.
I don't know how much I was reading it or when I was actually writing it, but I really liked, is it Friends and Strangers, the J. Courtney Sullivan book about the a woman and the woman who comes to work for her in her house taking care of her kids, and they have such an unusual relationship with each other. Yeah.
I was kind of writing, I know there are, I have not read what's her name, Ferrante. I haven't read I know there are wonderful books about female friendship, and I did read some, but I was kind of writing out of thinking about male books and why can't women do these things. Sort of in my mind always was, on the road, I'm going to go hit the road and see the country and drive off in this car. Well, girls don't get to do that, because they'd be raped and murdered or whatever in their car. Or Huck Finn jumps on a raft and goes down the Mississippi. So I was kind of thinking, how does the culture respond when two women are friends, frenemies, whatever, and go off into the world in this way through college and then beyond. So I was kind of thinking about the trope and how it might be different with women.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. For whatever reason,
We're gonna think of a million titles in like 9
there's gonna be
minutes.
so many titles.
Yeah,
So, you know, it's not a book, but I've been obsessed with watching Call the Midwife. Do you know that show?
I do.
And I think it's because it's about women doing their work and being friends while they do that, and women from really different backgrounds. And so this idea of, you know, the kind of friends that you make through your work, who you might be introduced to that you would not meet other ways. I think that really interests me. I don't know that plays into the story, but.
I mean, Alice Munro is the writer I love so much, and certainly so many of her stories feature women who are friends, who have, you know, power struggles, who have regrets. If someone wanted to read more about that,
That's a good suggestion.
I think we're kind of trained to for women, it's like the group of 4, like the 4 girls who go to college, the 4 members of Little Women, Sex in the City, set of 4 sort of group. And so I think it's interesting to just have, for me anyway, like, no, you don't have this group. There's nowhere to hide. There's only you and her. What's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, here we are, all 4 of us. Thank you so much for being here.